Now to breaking news out of Newport News. Police Chief Steve Drew giving an update on a shooting from last night involving his officers and a suicidal man.
All right, let's listen in.
We talked a little bit about earlier with you about the situation of the call that we were on last night. However, there was a lot of moving parts. There still is. I want to preface this. This is still the early stages of an investigation. We're not even 24 hours in, and there were a lot of things that I wanted to do. Anytime that you have an officer-involved shooting, there's a lot of pieces. Health and welfare of the individual that has suffered the gunshots. Talking with the officers, family members, that matters to me. Our Commonwealth Attorney. I've had several conversations with our mayor and city manager. I was able to go up to the hospital today. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's just important to me when we talk about the totality of everything. So you should have got the press release last night. My intent today is not to dwell too far into the case. This still has to be investigated. There's a lot more interviews that will take place in partnership with our Commonwealth Attorney. But what I did want to try to provide is a little bit of a timeline, a time frame of what occurred last night, what our response was, where we're at today, and then what will take place in the future. I'll take a few questions, but again, I just preface, bear with me. I can't go, there's still an investigation ongoing, but I do believe it's important for us to be as transparent, and that's the line I'm going to try to walk today. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the timeline for the incident, the incident last night, an officer-involved shooting in the 600 block of Cleveland Avenue. This did take part in an apartment complex, sort of under a pull-in parking garage, if you will. And the vehicle was parked there. At 8:01 last night, a call was received by our dispatch center. The caller advised that I think it's spelled Jean, but it's pronounced John Alcindor. 42-year-old adult male is not sounding like himself, and he's conveying suicidal tendencies. The caller stated that John may have some drug issues and feels that he may have overdosed in reference to a suicide. Now that's the information that came to dispatch and is transmitted to officers. That is coming from a family member, but that's the information that officers are receiving at the time of the call. At 8:04, after the information was obtained, the call was dispatched to our officers. So at that point, officers were dispatched as well as medics. Around 8:09, medics arrived in the area and they were staged in a safe location, and officers arrived and began to interact around 8:13. The first two officers there on the scene. The officers were able, about 8:14, to confirm that the subject was armed and that he did have a possession of a firearm. At 8:15, officers heard one gunfire, one gunshot, one round go off inside of a vehicle as they set up and established a perimeter and tried to gain contact with the individual. Now there is a time between about 8:13 and 9:39 that officers are seeing movement inside the vehicle. They do see the individual inside the vehicle that we believe to be Jean or John. I'm going to call him Mr. Alcindor so to help with a little bit of the pronunciation. But between the time frame of 8:13 and 9:39, officers see the subject moving around inside the vehicle, drinking alcohol, and in the possession of a firearm. Officers began negotiating by phone and talking with the subject about 8:49. So it took a little bit of time to try to get him to answer his phone, to get a number for him, and to have some back and forth, some communication. The individual that was leading that communication was an officer who was actually on the street working, but they're also on our negotiating team that works hand in hand with our SWAT team. So those type calls are trying to find what the situation is and trying to de-escalate. And that's important. You'll hear me talk about that a few more times as we go forward in this situation. The subject remained in the vehicle during the negotiations as his conversations were going on. Now between that time frame, 8:13 to 9:39, they see movement in the vehicle. They're able to see him. Officers begin negotiating by phone about 8:49 is the time we started having conversations. So this is important. One of the concerns when we have a long-standing situation is what are the elements, right? Are they exposed to rain or snow? The temperatures last night were in the low 30s, and that's a concern of mine. One of the first things I did when I was notified was kind of look at the time, and then what is the temperature outside that I have officers exposed to the elements. At 9:39, the SWAT team was activated. And when I say that means there was a SWAT team called out, and they staged a location to start to put a plan together to address the situation, and I'm also cognizant of how long the officers have been out in this weather. At 10:29, the subject exited the vehicle with a firearm in his hands, and you hear an officer say, "I'm not going to do that. He said for me to shoot him. I'm not going to do that." At 10:30, officer yelled several commands numerous times to drop the firearm. We hear phrases of drop the firearm, put it down, please stop, put the gun down. And that's about 10:30 p.m. The subject is walking directly towards the officers at this time. This is still around 10:30 with the gun in his hand. About 10:30 and 30 seconds or 32 seconds, the subject is within close proximity of the officers and fires a round. A few seconds pass, about 10:30 and 49 seconds, another round is fired moving in the direction of the officers. The officers replied, do not point the gun at me. So after this second round is fired outside of the vehicle, the individual continues to walk towards the officers, looking at them, and starts to move the gun in their direction, and you hear the officer say, don't point the gun at me. The officer replies, don't point the gun at me, and a third round is fired at this point once the struggle begins. So because of close proximity, one of the officers was able to reach out and make contact with the individual who had the firearm, and you start to see a struggle begin. The gun as that struggle goes on, a third round goes off. That's the third round that I'm talking about. And then a fourth round is fired, which strikes one of our officers in his department-issued taser that is carried on his duty belt. At that point, officers return fire, and our victim is struck 2 times. The same officers that are involved in the shooting immediately begin to provide medical attention to the individual who suffered a gunshot wounds, I should say. And so at this point, medics are called in. As officers are taking life-saving measures, medics are called in, and they begin to take over the medical treatment. The individual is loaded then into the ambulance. They begin to give care for the victim. He's taken into the ambulance and transported to a nearby hospital where he's undergoing treatment. So a lot of things at this point happen now as we bring in forensics to process the crime scene, to photograph the crime scene. We're canvassing the neighborhood, talking to individuals. There were several individuals when I got there that I saw that were outside that I believe possibly heard or saw something. Detectives did that well and through the night and even into this morning. We came back here. We brought the officers that were involved back here to headquarters, and our protocol is first to make sure that they are okay. I notified again my city manager and the mayor last night and late last night, early into the morning. In the holiday season, one of the things we always talk about is individuals that may be struggling through some things. You never know what's going on inside someone's life, and whatever those feelings may be, and you induce that with alcohol, depression. Remember the call came in of a loved one that talked about suicidal tendencies, all those things, the totality of what the situation is. I'm thankful that none of the officers were injured. I spent time with them. We were here till about 5 this morning. I spent time with them and talked with them myself. This morning, detectives met with the Commonwealth Attorney. They were also notified, and they sat down and had some discussions. I don't want to go into the questions, and I was not present for that. But that's our standard protocol when we're investigating a police-involved shooting. I talked again with the mayor this morning and afternoon, as well as our city manager. And I did reach out to each of the officers again this afternoon and checking on them. I also was able to reach out to the wife of the individual that's at the hospital. We had a short conversation, and I told her that she matters to me, and I just wanted to check on her. And then myself and Chief Grinstead went to the hospital to check on Mr. Alcindor. I needed to see him for myself. I was able to talk to a nurse there, and I did not go in the room, but I did put eyes on him directly. That matters to me. He matters to me. Whatever situation or he was going through. It's regretful that this happened, and then to inject a fireman, that even makes things worse. But I would describe him as critical but stable. Critical but stable. So we went through a litany. Chief Creswell stayed at the scene for a while to make sure it was processed correctly. They had everything in place there, that we have detectives here. We had support staff. I did call our department psychologist by phone and have a conversation with him. There was evidence recovered at the scene, including the firearm. And hats off to the officers. There were several things, several times that the officers tried to de-escalate. Please put the gun down. We don't want to hurt you. Don't make me do this. There were several comments, numerous times, whether on the phone before he got out of the vehicle or after, when it becomes a much more dangerous situation. So,
all right, you were just listening to Newport News Police Chief Steve Drew there, police telling us about police in a situation being called around 8 p.m. to respond to a suicidal man in his car. Officers negotiated with the man for about 2 hours before he got out of the car, walked towards police, firing his weapon.
And officers were able to get a hold of the man and take him to the hospital after they fired shots. Apparently, he was shot twice. He's in the hospital in stable condition. And you hear the police chief talking about the efforts to try to de-escalate the situation and the information that they got when the call came in about him being suicidal. We're going to continue to follow this story. We do have a reporter who is there at that news conference, and she's going to have a full report coming up at 5 o'clock.
All right, we'll be right back.